Thank you all of you for joining. It's good to have you all here. Good afternoon. Welcome to this In Conversation in Community session. My name is Rebecca Chan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Managing Director of Operations and Impact with Seattle Foundation. I'm going to be facilitating, moderating today, but we'll be passing it to our guest speakers momentarily. So welcome, folks. I see folks are still coming in. Some housekeeping things at the very beginning. Well, actually, first, I do want to acknowledge, as we get started, that Seattle Foundation and our offices sit on land which is the traditional home of the Coast Salish people. We acknowledge them as original and current stewards of the region. So today, I think for those of you who just joined, welcome to this In Conversation in Community session on the Fund for Inclusive Recovery. This session is really meant to be as personal as possible. So no slides today. This is really about being in conversation together. So to help facilitate that, I encourage you to kind of play with the Zoom views. Feel free to do the speaker view or the Hollywood squares as we get into conversation. Hopefully more of you will be able to come onto screen. We do have closed captioning available. That's through the live transcript. I want folks to know that we are recording today's call. It's for internal processes, and we're going to be sharing the link with some of the folks who couldn't join today, but we're not going to be kind of broadcasting it publicly or broadly. And then we'll definitely ensure that there's time for full group conversation, and we'll definitely, encourage you all to come onto screen, come off mute, so that we can all be in dialogue together. So before jumping into the content for today, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the tragedies that are happening. 10 days ago, there was a Buffalo shooting. There was a shooting in Buffalo in the Black community. 8 days ago, there was a shooting in Taiwanese community in California. Yesterday, there was an elementary school shooting in a predominantly Latinx town in Texas, and today is actually the 2-year anniversary of the day that George Floyd was murdered. So I just needed to be honest and authentic with where I am. I'm struggling to find the right words. There aren't any right words in this moment. And I think I felt going through today that nothing really felt important enough, and at the same time, doing nothing also doesn't feel right. So just wanted to say that I acknowledge that this sort of news impacts folks differently. People react differently. But I want to welcome everyone to just show up as you are. I invited our guest speakers this morning. I just told them, do whatever compels you today. If you want to show up and be outraged, you feel devastated, if you want to, lean into inspiration and hope, or if you just want to focus solely on the content at hand and what you've prepared for talking today, whatever it may be, we welcome it all. And I just welcome all of you too in this room to show up as you are. It's also just connected a lot to what we want to talk about today, because the decades of inaction on the violence in this nation is even more reason why we're here, why it's more important that we build community, why it's more important that we invest in new infrastructures that will lead us to kind of a reinvented system, to different policies, to different outcomes. So I'm really grateful you all are here. I think this feels like the best thing I can be doing in this moment. So thank you all of you, for showing up today. So take a deep breath. And I think with that, I'll take a step back and kind of go back to original programming. And I'm going to spend a few more minutes setting the context for today's questions. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the conversation with our amazing guest speakers. After doing kind of a panel discussion, we'll open it up the room for Q&A and be in conversation with all of you before we close out at 2. So that's the plan. And so with that, I will want to set, again, like I said, some context for today's conversation. So this is a Seattle Foundation event. Welcome. Seattle Foundation is guided by our blueprint for impact. We envision a thriving region of shared prosperity, belonging, and justice, where all individuals and communities have equitable access and outcomes, regardless of race, place, and identity. So as we work towards a more equitable future, Seattle Foundation works across various programs to advance our 3 pillars of a thriving region. So a just democracy, an equitable economy, and a resilient environment. In doing so, we invest in and recognize the importance of leadership development, community organizing, capacity building, coalition building, and policy work, which we'll get into more. So as part of this vision and our programming, Seattle Foundation hosts this Fund for Inclusive Recovery, which is what we're here for today. So it's been over 2 years since COVID-19 arrived and kind of stopped life as we knew it. Right now, we're trying to find the new normal, kind of adjust to a new normal. And we also, as we do that, can't forget the unprecedented levels of inequality rooted in decades of racial and economic inequities in this region. So before the pandemic, we know that racialized disparities included access to everything from healthy food, affordable housing, educational opportunities across King County. And we know that the pandemic just made all of that much, much worse. So Seattle Foundation's COVID-19 Response Fund was one of the first in the nation and was led by a group of 20 amazing community leaders. And through 2020, those leaders really pressed us, Seattle Foundation, as a community foundation. They pressed us to play our role in ensuring that philanthropy would take the lessons that we were learning in this moment to guide us forward and to make sure that we don't simply go back to kind of a normal rife with inequities. And we have to focus on reimagining our systems so that those systems are inclusive and supportive for everybody in our community. So with that, just a little over a year ago, we launched the Fund for Inclusive Recovery, which is a pooled fund that invests in community power and base building, developing the infrastructure and pathways needed for long-term reinvention of equitable systems. And the fund has two goals. First and foremost is to raise and deploy $50 million over the course of 5 years to really invest in efforts to reimagine systems led by Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And the second is to shift grant-making approaches and behaviors to be more trust-based and to incorporate greater equity into our practice. So our community advisory group has really been at the heart of this work, a group of 20 community leaders. They've guided and shaped the creation of the fund. They've both guided the purpose and the intended outcomes, as well as the approach and how to ensure that we're being more equitable in our grant-making practices. So with their leadership, we're really proud that earlier this month, we were able to announce the first set of 21 grantees. Each of those grantees are receiving $200,000 a year for a minimum of 3 years. And this totals a commitment of $13 million, which, I'd have to say a huge thank you to, especially to those of you in the room who've contributed to the fund and have really made that first round of grant making possible. So that was a lot of context and kind of enough for me. With that, I'm really delighted to be joined by Lalita Uppala, our Executive Director of Indian American Community Services. She's both a member of our community advisory group as well as a grantee recipient, and Christine Tang, our Executive Director of Families of Color Seattle, also a grantee recipient. So with that, I would love to kind of invite Christine, Lalita, for you both to come and join this conversation. If you wouldn't mind both introducing yourself and sharing more about your organizations and your work. Lalita, I'll start it off with you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hello, everyone. I'm Lalita Uppala, Executive Director of Indian American Community Services, and I really start this conversation with my prayers and the strength of my community at large in this nation to the families that have been completely devastated in the last few months of what has happened again in our nation. And just thinking of that and being very mindful and thoughtful that I'm coming from a space of gratefulness as being an immigrant in this nation, but also with the intention of being a civic immigrant in this nation to do what I think we need to do. So with that, what is Indian American Community Services about? We are a community-based organization that provides support services to the Asian Indian immigrant community in Washington State. We identify basic, urgent, and emergent needs of our community, and we provide support services through a very culturally nuanced lens. And I will lead this on to Christine.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, and the Seattle Foundation for the fund and for setting the context for our conversation today. It is difficult to find the words to address all the tragedies and the deadly manifestations of hate so many of our communities have had to endure. So I will just say that and will choose to put all my energy and focus on working within the community and with our partners towards being part of the solution. So I have been the Executive Director of Families of Color Seattle since March 2020. And if some of you are doing the math, yes, that's right. I started at the same time as the pandemic. That was my first day in the office in the new role, and the office closed. So it's been a really, really hectic and, of course, unpredictable and in many ways devastating and in many ways uplifting couple of years through which our organization, Families of Color Seattle, has stayed on its path and enhanced our services to help support and provide resources and community for more and more families of color. So our vision for Families of Color Seattle, we exist so that children of color are born into a community that's loving and that's racially and economically just. And this is what that means for us, that BIPOC families are supported in the community so that they can love, that they can raise loved and healthy and justice-oriented children. It means that we also are building collective power through our cross-racial and cross-cultural solidarity work in order to advance racial justice and improve outcomes for families of color. So we do that through our central program, which is parent support groups that are cohort-based. They're led by parent educators, supported and trained by our organization, and they are the place where a lot of families of color with children of various ages are finding community. They're learning about tools that they can use to advocate for their children, to instill pride and a good sense of self-worth in their BIPOC children, and to connect with others in the communities, which can be quite difficult living in a city like Seattle. In addition to the parent groups, and we have, by the way, we have parent support groups for newborns, for toddlers, and a lot of multi-age affinity groups for Black moms, for Native families, for single moms, for families who have BIPOC children with disability, for LGBTQ families of color, and several others. So in addition to the parent group program, we have what we call family programs that are arts or cultural based events, one-off events where families of color gather, usually around one activity that is led with with the children. And the third type of program that we have centers on system change type of work. So we do racial equity work, we do trainings on anti-racism, on racial identity in children, and we'll go into this later into the conversation, but this is where the Fund for Inclusive Recovery comes in at just the right time, because we are expanding those efforts and we are becoming more and more focusing on advocacy, on being impactful in the work that we do at systemic level. I'll stop here, Rebecca. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. Thank you both for those introductions. And I think that leads us, I might ask this question, have you start us off, Christine, because that leads us into the next question. In my introduction, I talked a lot about community power, base building, reinventing systems. And if you, both of you, could help us understand, what does this work actually look like? If it'd be great if you could help tell us about the community power and base building work that both of your organizations have already undertaken. So Christine, I think you were starting to talk to that, and I'll let you take it away first.
Yeah, so Families of Color Seattle has existed for 9 years. Yes, this is our 9th year since inception. And initially, it was really a grassroots, very informal, gathering-based type of network where parents of color, primarily mothers, were meeting and talking with one another. And from that, it's incredible to see that only 9 years later, we are at the point where we have a network of thousands of families in the Seattle area that that are looking to us to provide racial justice tools and education and advocacy. And we're also at a point where we can be, as an organization, we can be member of advocacy or have a seat at the table in policy discussion. We can partner with other organizations because we have all these families in our network whom we can mobilize for racial justice. And there are many issues that are important to our family, such as reproductive justice, health, education equity, and economic equity, and so many others that have a tremendous impact on families of color.
Thank you, Christine. And Lalita, if you wouldn't mind sharing too about IACS.
Sure. And well, thanks to Seattle Foundation, we are the proud recipients of a coalition grant where three of us, East King County organizations, East Side for All, Muslim Community Neighborhood Association, and Indian American Community Services are going to be sharing this coalition work through the Inclusive Recovery Fund that we have been allotted, Rebecca. And part of that work is we always jump into the needs without waiting for the funding to come in, because we do provide, look at this, we are an immigrant organization. We provide wraparound services, we work with seniors, we work with women, we work with youth, with toddlers and parents of early childhood families. So we are there with our community. We are on the streets. We are doing that work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Our phones never stop ringing. Our work never stops happening. So the needs that get identified through it get served. But how sustainable is that work? That comes in when foundations like Seattle Foundation step in to empower us with funding, to provide us the capacity so that we can go that extra mile. We can be comprehensive and we can be really far-reaching in the kind of work that we do. Some of the community organizing and base building work that we have done in the past have been where we have recognized that our immigrant communities have voters who come from many different voting systems. Take an example of the Asian Indian community here itself. We don't have levies in our voting system. We don't vote for Supreme Court or High Court judge. We don't vote for the judges and the justices. We don't vote for city councils. This is a very different electoral system. We come in with a lot of voter apathy. So when we come into a system like this, it takes our voters a while to understand what this system is about. And because we are working with our community 7 days a week, we identify that as a gap. We get out to host town halls, to host webinars. Thanks to COVID, we have amplified our virtual work, but we do a lot of town halls, focus groups, community conversations, speaker series. We call them Log Kya Sochenge? What will people say? And we bring in these conversations that are so important to our communities to understand what the gaps in our systems are, to understand that your vote and your voice matters, right? So how do you get to that? What is the difference here? A levy that a King County library system needs voted on. Why is it important to you? That we have to go down to those basic education measures and awareness pieces that we address. To the fact that when light rail started its work, what is light rail? Why would it impact you? What would it make? How would it make your life easier? And going to those light rail stations, when you are standing and waiting for your stop, what else do you read in those light rail stations? What kind of advocacy and information pieces can you have? That's the kind of collaboration we've had with light rail. to affordable housing. Who thinks that there is a need for affordable housing and affordable rent in East King County? How does stereotyping communities negatively impact affordability in communities? What does that mean? Taking community members, listening to them, creating ambassador groups among them, taking them to these community conversations that we invite our electeds, local electeds from city, state level, and having our community members speak their truth in terms of what their challenges are. That, yes, I am the spouse of a tech worker. Guess what? That tech worker is subcontracted out and brings half his salary home. That salary feeds 8 people. We are 8 people crowded in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment in East Side. Is that affordable rent? No. Because you have so much else to do. You have health insurance, you have car insurance. You don't have this in India. You have to figure all this out. So there's a lot of education pieces. There is a lot of information that we need to provide. But most important of it all is how intimidating it is as an immigrant to speak in a room full of people, be that virtual or be that in person. I'm a community leader and an advocate. I still get intimidated. I get intimidated when I have to speak policy. And I know, Rebecca, often people think I don't, but there is a hesitation in me to speak my truth. Is someone going to believe me? If I'm saying that, what would a mom of a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old recently separated from her spouse due to domestic violence say when I take her to a community speaking series so that elected officials hear from her? And right after that, is there something going to come out of it? So am I taking her and making her vulnerable moment worthwhile? There's a lot to community organizing and base building. It requires trust. It requires understanding. It requires compassion and communication. It requires a huge amount of capacity. So thank you to Seattle Foundation for empowering us. And thank you for our philanthropists for understanding that there is a need here.
Wonderful. Thank you for speaking your truth, Lalita. It's why we have you here. I know it's not easy, but I just appreciate both of you in the way that you talked about the work, because it is both the kind of tactical activity of voter education, of getting folks to the right place to speak in town halls, but it is the trust building, it is the relationship, like that is what enables all of this ecosystem to move. And so I just so grateful for the work that you all do in the way that you talked about that. Kind of thinking about, I guess, future work that you all want to do. And, the Fund for Inclusive Recovery is why we're all here. I would love to hear from both of you. What is the work that you plan to undertake now that you have the Fund for Inclusive Recovery resources, and what would success look like as an outcome of that work? So Christine, maybe I can pass it to you.
Yes. Thank you, Rebecca. I was thinking about Lalita's sharing, and that those were very powerful statements, Lalita. The work that we plan to undertake is really to formulate. So the first thing is to formulate the advocacy strategy and grow into the role. Because we had very, very limited capacity building. Just to give you a sense of how big we were, there were only 3 of us 26 months ago. So right now we have a staff of 6, about half of them are part-time. But just to give you a sense of how much we've been doing with how few resources and how few people really. And I would say that we need to focus on growing the strategy, because in the past 2 to 3 years, we've been kind of pulled into responding to various things. And we know that the last 2 years have been anything but usual. But we did feel compelled to jump in and respond or be part of this and that, advocacy initiative. And we realized that number one, that this was not sustainable. Number two, this was not effective. And number three, it was not really to the benefit of us as an organization, the families we served, and the reality of what we could do as employees. So we will focus on developing the organization-wide strategy for advocacy and steadily grow into that role. We already narrowed in the strategic plan the type of advocacy areas that we think will be involved in: direct advocacy, for civic education, I mentioned those areas earlier: reproductive health, maternal and infant health, education, and economic. And part of the developing the strategy will be also developing the screen or criteria to understand what relevant policies we want to support, and then to identify partners with whom to align, to share strategy, and these are based on the priority issues that are relevant to our values and mission, and to the partners' values and mission. And the next step after that, which is one very relevant and important to folks, is to develop a strategy to intentionally engage our families, the thousands of families that we have in our network, so that they become advocates themselves, for their own family, and also for the wider advocacy issues that we as an organization are engaging in. And of course, a key part of this, and this is where the Fund for Inclusive Recovery comes in, is that we are able, with these funds, we're able to grow our internal advocacy capacity. We'd be able to become better, versed in how advocacy is done, and of course, be able to hire an advocacy person on staff, something that we have not really been able to do until now.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question, Rebecca?
It does. And I have to be honest, like I shared this with Christine before, but Christine and I have not met, but I am a folks mom. My child was born May 2020, and our folks mom group is the most life-changing group, and we are ready to be mobilized. So everything Christine is saying is spot on, because there's a network of thousands of moms and parents that will just mobilize for each other in a split second. So all very exciting. But Lalita, maybe I can pass it to you to share about your upcoming plans with your coalition.
Sure, absolutely. So with our coalition of Muslim Community Neighborhood Association, East Side for All, and Indian American Community Services, we will each be hiring a community organizer and advocate from our own organizations. But our goal really is to create collective impact on the East Side. Our goal is to find the qualified individuals, help train them, and to work collectively and collaboratively to identify the gaps that exist in East King County. There are several such gaps we've identified, Rebecca. I'll start with, look at this. Each city has commissions. There are human services commissions, there are park planning commissions, there are art commissions, there are health commissions, and all of these commissions speak for the citizens of that city, the residents of that city. How many of those truly are representative of who lives in that city? In East King County itself, we can see several of those gaps. And so our work really is going to start out with identifying within our communities those needs, creating those community conversations, workshops, and training opportunities, having these organizers in our teams so that we can create such workshop series and then train individuals to go out and speak at town halls, to speak at city council, to make a public comment. What does it mean to have a public comment that is for 2 minutes only? And you have to be so impactful in those 2 minutes. I have never been able to achieve that so far. So, so our goal really is to train community members to go out, speak participate in public comments, know how to send off those emails to King County Council, to your city council, to your state representatives, and further on, when you feel like your voice needs to be heard. And my gosh, does that voice not need to be heard today? Don't we all need to reach out to our electeds and speak to them and hold our electeds collectively accountable? And that has to happen from every single community member. It cannot happen from one community leader saying, oh, I'm going to send off this email. So that's the kind of work we have to do now. We have to identify, we have to empower our community. We have to train individuals. We have to train our young adults to run for office. We have to encourage our empty nesters, our first generation immigrants who think that they cannot run for office, that they absolutely can run for office. And they absolutely should if they want to. So what does it take to get all that training done? Well, Inclusive Recovery Fund is the answer to that for us. So each of us 3 organizations are going to work together. We're going to identify those gaps. We're going to get our people in, whether it means writing an email, public comment, participating in volunteer capacities in these commissions and boards, or running for office. All of those need to be done. And time's running out for us, so.
That's perfect, Lalita. For a second, I thought I forgot I was facilitating. I felt like you were doing a call to action for me. Like I need to do something right now. So thank you for your voice. There's a lot of work to do ahead of you all and all of us. I'd love to hear more about what are the key challenges that you foresee in this work, just so that as you all think about your next steps, what are the things that you all are really facing? Maybe Lalita, I can let you start this one off.
I won't be as verbose, and Christine, I would like you to take this on more. But I think the challenges wise, I've spoken to this before, the intimidation that you have, the reservedness that you have. You come from a culture where you really don't speak your truth. It's about making sure that you just put your next foot forward, but you don't speak your truth. So how do you learn to speak that truth? And it's the trust that we build in day in and day out with our community, and we still hit walls when it comes to speaking your truth and convincing you to do that extra mile. It's important to go and do your work. It's important to get good grades, but it's important to speak up. It's important to participate in civic duty. And that mindset of an immigrant, to change that, but also to get the decision-making tables to hear you out. I don't speak your language. I don't speak your body language, but you have to listen to me. And what does it take? This is a space I'm very comfortable in because I come to this space every month so I can speak here. But there are many situations where we are oftentimes doing multitasking. We jump onto meetings, may not be as prepared. How do you empower your community to still speak with the power of their community behind them and have those decision-making tables hear you out and understand what it means to provide services through a culturally nuanced lens? Why is it important that sitting down in a mental health support group in a room with a candle lit is not our version of a mental health support group, but it is somebody else's version of a mental health support group? So what is our version of it? To speak out about that, it takes a lot of courage. It takes training. It also takes decision-making tables to be open to authentic conversations and to have a follow-up after that. So there are those challenges that we are dealing with, Rebecca. And Christine, on to you on this.
Yeah, that's so true. I would say there there are a lot of challenges that we cannot foresee right now. And when I say that, I'm thinking about the pandemic, especially. We can foresee that being as a challenge, but we still have no idea of like when and what type of new challenges are ahead. I was just reading earlier about this new subversion of Omicron becoming the widest spread. The widest spread of cases in the US, and this is a third version of Omicron. There's just so much that we do not know, and we have to build for all sorts of contingencies and planning, and that of course involves advocacy planning. So that's definitely a big one for us. Another key challenge will be, I mean, really the reason why we're doing this work, which is that we are challenging the system. So the system does not take lightly to that, is designed to be immovable and unchangeable. So the type of challenges that will come from that are difficult to predict, but we know to anticipate them. We know that they're going to be there. And especially with this funding, we'll be better equipped to advocate effectively. Last but not least, I know I mentioned the pandemic, and I was thinking about it from like a health perspective, but I'm also thinking about all the other ramifications, because it's not just the direct health impact of the people affected, but the impacts that the pandemic has had on BIPOC communities in very outsized ways, when it comes to job loss, when it comes to impacts related to childcare, access to various services for people with disabilities. So we'll have to do what I think we already do pretty well, but we will have to do so much better to look at any type of issue we're advocating for through an intersectional lens. So that means we're leading with race when we advocate for racial equity. We have to make sure that we advocate for racial equity that's also equitable to people who are BIPOC and have disabilities, to BIPOC people who are housing insecure, who might not speak English as a first language, who might be LGBTQ or in other ways marginalized by the system. Because if we're not representing those of us who are most vulnerable, then we're not really doing a good job of representing our communities.
A lot of work ahead. Just trying to take a deep breath and take that all in. But I'm just watching the clock, and I might just ask one more question before we go to the open Q&A. So for those of you in the audience, feel free to start thinking about your questions that you want to ask. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because I shared at the beginning that we have two aims of the fund. And first is to raise and deploy $50 million. And then the second part is to really shift our grant making practices and see how we can shift the field of philanthropy so that we are being more accessible and being more equitable as we grant out dollars. So our community advisory group really helps guide our approach for this first round of grant making. And we try to be really intentional through the process. So that kind of looked like some specific examples of spending dedicated time in site visits, because we know that oftentimes the work is most easily and best communicated through storytelling and live interactions. This looks like, uplifting a list of unfunded applicants to donors to try to catalyze more giving, knowing that there are so many deserving organizations. Our program team made themselves available via text, email, phone call, trying to be as accessible to the applicants as possible. And we gave $2,000 honorariums to the finalists, all finalists, knowing that it takes deep time and expertise to be applying and doing the full application. So kind of throughout the process, we're trying to be really thoughtful and really reflect the intentions of the community advisory group. And so with that, I'd love to hear with Lalita, you as our community advisory group member, how did the grant making for this first round kind of reflect the intentions of the CAG or community advisory group? And then Christine, as an applicant, I'd love to hear, how this sort of grant making impacted your experience.
So, Rebecca, I think part of the community advisory group's goal was really to bring voice to the value that BIPOC communities bring to the overall economy, and the fact that we BIPOC communities are critical to shaping the economy of the Puget Sound region. And it's not about strengthening us, rather it's about empowering us so that we can do what we do best, is bring innovative solutions and to structure equitably the economy, the voices, the work that has to be done from the BIPOC communities. And I think with that, the community advisory group was very thoughtful and mindful about the conversations that we conducted. There were honest conversations that happened, and I want to uplift the fact that there are grassroots BIPOC organizations that do amazing amount of work, but need the capacity still, and their funding dollars are only so available. And you need more funding to bring in more grassroots organizations up, but also the ones like my own organization or my colleagues and partners in this work need to be very thoughtful and intentioned about lifting up these BIPOC grassroots organizations by mentoring, by collaborating, by bringing partnerships so that we bring in the training and the experience. So the next time around, these BIPOC grassroots small organizations also get lifted up because they have the experience, they have the know-how, and they've put in the structure. So there's a lot of conversation that happened from the community advisory group about lifting up smaller grassroots organizations and about bringing voice to the BIPOC grassroots and community organizations. And I think Seattle Foundation has done an outstanding job in hearing us and in honoring those thoughts and putting down intentions that are true and are going to be sustainable and long-term.
Thank you, Lalita. And Christine, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what it was like as an applicant to the fund. And now this is probably the first time you are hearing about our intentions. So I'd love to hear your reflections there.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think that's such an important question coming from funders, and especially seeing that a funder truly wants the process to be good for the grantees, and also to be effective in the way they solicit the proposals and making sure that the right applicants get selected. For us, I would say the process was relatively, what word should I use? Smooth. So it wasn't, I do not remember complications in applying for the grant. I do remember the care that came through in conversations with people from the foundation in the site visit. There was humility there. There was acknowledgement and gratitude expressed for the work that we do before we were even selected to be a grantee, and that mattered a lot. That was really it was important to us to be seen that way. I would say I was especially impressed with the part of the applications that sought to really identify truly BIPOC organizations and making sure that the applicants were not only checking boxes, but truly representing the communities, like having the cultural license to represent the communities that they were speaking of and that they were applying to support. So it felt in filling out the application, especially in those sections, it felt that we were being seen for the work that we were doing. And I'm really hoping to see, as a result of what you all are doing and what other funders hopefully will be doing to follow suit, a shift from the current model where, even for BIPOC focused funding, BIPOC led and staff organizations are not receiving grants at the level that other nonprofits are. So I really, really, really hope to see that changing, and thank you for being part of that change.
Thank you, Christine. I know we're very intentional about our approach, and we have a long way to go. There's always more to do, but I'm grateful that we have a community advisory group and grantees that will hold us accountable. So a lot of appreciation for the community that has, we're really just following, and I know will voice when we need to make changes. So with that, I would love to invite folks in the audience, this virtual audience, if you all want to come on screen, come off mute. If you have questions for Christine or Lalita, would really welcome you all to join in here. And as folks think about their questions, I'm happy to start us off, but I see Caroline coming off mute.
Sure, I'll have a question for you. Thanks. I'm with United Way, and it's great to hear about this fund. And my question mainly is about the community accountability, community council, whatever you're calling it. Community advisory group. That's what it is. Is that a group that is just for this particular fund, or that Seattle Foundation has for all the work you're doing and it's community facing?
Great question. Yeah, our community advisory group for the Fund for Inclusive Recovery is a set of 20 or so individuals that was also mostly the same group for our COVID-19 response fund. So they are really, the champions of this work. But for all of our programs, we have different sorts of advisory committees. Our Neighbor to Neighbor, there's an advisory committee. We really kind of loop in community members to advise us and guide us for all of our program development. So like I said, the Neighbor to Neighbor has an advisory group. We have a Black-led organizations coalition that really guides our repair framework, and the Black-led Joint Wellness Fund. So depending on kind of the altitude of our programming, we're really really intentional about bringing in other voices, knowing that that's who ultimately we are trying to serve.
Thanks. Yeah, that answers. We're struggling. We're struggling, or in conversations around, do we have one group? Do we have one for each program? So it sounds like that's what you're doing. Yeah.
Customized. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to that question, Carolyn, partly it's because there's unique insights and experiences that are needed for different programs or different efforts. And I think what's most important for us is that there's experience, there's experience, lived experience, professional experience that from and representing communities most impacted by the issues that communities are confronting, and that we are supporting and bringing together the diversity of our neighbors in this region to provide thoughtful counsel on and from design to decision making. And I think part of it, and we hear this a lot, and Lalita and Christine can speak to this, and some of it is that our community leaders and grant partners like Lalita and Christine want to have more direct access to other funders and donors, and don't want us to serve as mediators or gatekeepers. So we're constantly also thinking about how do we extend those tables to also include wider audiences, so that people have greater proximity to one another, given how segregated our society is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're in lots of conversations. We have those kind of advisory groups already, and it will be a nice problem, I suppose, that we funders will have in the future when all of us have lots of these different advisory groups and our grantees are maxed out. But it'll be a good problem. It's nice to see the tides changing, that we have these, and we'll face that when it gets to be a challenge, too much of a challenge for the grantees, I guess.
Thanks for that question. Other folks, other ponderings, reflections, questions?
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Diana. Yes.
I just have a comment. So I'm in Snohomish County, so I just want to say that just watching the work that you all are doing in King County is something that's spreading among the region. And so, you know, it's just enlightening to see it happen. I know how hard the work is. It feels like it expands and contracts. And sometimes you feel like you're busting through new territory, and then other times you feel like you're back in the 60s or something. So, but I think that it just, you know, we just got to keep working hard. And I just wanted to say thank you for leading and showing some of the smaller communities how to lead the way. So thank you.
Really appreciate that, Diana. Have a couple minutes left. I'd welcome any other questions, or I can always pass it to Christina and Lalita if you have any closing thoughts before our last agenda item. Let's see if other folks have questions. Yeah, Sherry. Oh, you're on mute.
Yep. To the point that was made earlier, I am wondering how you bring these learnings and these connections to the different donors at the Seattle Foundation. That it's amazing that this work is happening and it's community led, but then how do you spread the learnings and the lessons to reach other funding sources?
Great question. I think part of, like we talked about, part of this intention is, like you said, to share some of the learnings, and something we're in the process of developing are some cross-sector tables where we really want to bring together funders, grantees to focus on either the programmatic side or the learning and evaluation side, and kind of deal with these, like get into the sticky questions of what it looks like to do equitable evaluation, what it looks like to do the programmatic work. So I think to accomplish a couple of things of being in this together, of forming those relationships between folks, and really supporting the Fund for Inclusive Recovery to make the fund even stronger. So that's one mechanism.
And it seems like there are lots of opportunities to leverage what you're doing into other grant making, right? So that this is kind of like a pilot that could be used in other forums. And it seems like that's a great opportunity.
I appreciate you saying that. I think that's absolutely the way we're looking at it. This is a unique opportunity that we have to really test things out and do things better, and see how it can translate out to both our grant making and other folks as well. But actually, with that question, I think this is a timely time for me to pass it to Lauren Domino. Lauren Domino is our Managing Director of Fundraising and Philanthropic Services. And so, Lauren, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to Sherry's question, but I'll also let you close us out here.
Sure. Well, Sherry, thanks so much for your question and for your partnership with Seattle Foundation. I think, as you know, you work closely with your philanthropic advisor. And for folks who do have a fund with us and that kind of relationship, we do try to really help move them along in their journey and thinking around what is this trust-based philanthropy. How can we take equity lens to the funding work that we're doing and look at communities that have historically been furthest from opportunity. So if that's work that you're really interested in, anyone on this call, I encourage you to reach out to me or any of the folks on our philanthropic services team, because it is work that not only we want to lead through our discretionary grant making programs and these pooled funds, but work we hope to inspire on an individual level from donors and inform how they do all of their grant making. So with that, I'm just taking a look at the time, and I am realizing it is our time to wrap up today. I want to start by thanking our wonderful partners, Christine and Lalita, about sharing their voice and a little bit about their work today. As Rebecca noted at the beginning of this, I imagine many of us are feeling today that our community and our society is not living up to the dreams that we have. It's not creating a community where we can all thrive. And I know that we cannot expect to see better outcomes unless we fundamentally shift systems. For me, today's conversation has provided some hope. Today's conversation has reinforced the power of working collectively. Together, we can accomplish so much more than any one donor or any one organization can tackle on their own. Through the Fund for Inclusive Recovery, together we are able to support these big multi-year investments in power and movement building to go after those very challenges that we are seeing in the headlines every day. And through the Fund for Inclusive Recovery, we are owning our responsibility to shift power and trust to those that are closest to the work, right, and best positioned to lead, to Sherry's point. Community voice has been the driver for the approach and the decisions on how all of these resources are directed. And we are working to build authentic partnerships through learning and relationship building across and amongst grantees and funders. For those of you who have already given to the Fund for Inclusive Recovery, and I know some of you are here today, I see you, thank you so much. For those of you who have not yet joined us in this effort, I encourage you to become a partner in this work. Please reach out to me, any one of the staff that you've seen today, or your philanthropic advisor to learn more. We'll be sending some additional information in the follow-up today as well. There are many ways to give, and we need many hands to do this work to realize a more equitable future. We are only in year 2 of this 5-year commitment. We still have a long way to go, and we need your help to carry this forward. So I thank you again for joining us today. I really hope you can take care, be well, take care of yourselves with everything that's going on. And with that, I will give you a minute back. So thank you all so much. And I do hope we can continue this conversation together. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Take good care.